The moving truck blocking my driveway should have been my first warning sign. Mrs. Patterson's voice cracked through my phone at 10:15 on a Tuesday morning. "Travis, honey, there are strangers carrying furniture into your beach house. Should I call the police?" My blood turned ice cold. I'd inherited that Cannon Beach cottage from my grandfather just 8 months ago, and nobody had permission to be there. Nobody except me had keys. I grabbed my jacket and raced toward the coast, my hands shaking as I dialed my mother's number. The winding coastal highway stretched before me like a ribbon of asphalt leading straight into chaos. Every curve reminded me of countless summer trips, with Grandpa Samuel, his weathered hands steady on the wheel, while he told stories about building that cottage himself in 1973. Back then, the wooden beams smelled like cedar and ocean salt, and the wraparound porch felt like the edge of the world. My Honda Civic's engine strained against the coastal wind as I pressed the accelerator harder. Mom hadn't answered her phone, which sent alarm bells ringing in my head louder than the surf below. Linda Morrison never missed a call, especially not from her only son. She prided herself on being available 24/7, a habit that drove me crazy during my teenage years, but now felt ominous in its absence. Cannon Beach appeared around the final bend, its iconic haystack rock standing guard over waves that crashed with unusual violence for April. Tourist season hadn't started yet, which made the bright yellow moving truck parked in my driveway even more jarring. The vehicle dominated the narrow street, forcing neighbors to navigate around it with visible annoyance. I parked 3 houses down and approached on foot, my heart hammering against my ribs. The cottage looked different somehow, as if strangers had already begun reshaping its character. Boxes labeled Cassie's Kitchen sat stacked near the front steps, while 2 mountain bikes leaned against the porch railing I'd helped Grandpa paint seafoam green just before his stroke. Travis. My sister Cassandra's voice rang out from the open front door. She emerged carrying a cardboard box marked Luke's room, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. At 35, she still moved with the athletic grace of her high school soccer days, but stress lines had appeared around her eyes since Christmas. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, climbing the familiar wooden steps that creaked in all the same places they had when I was 12. Before Cassandra could answer, my mother appeared behind her, directing 2 young boys who were dragging a red wagon filled with toys across the threshold. Linda Morrison looked exactly as commanding as always, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the chaos surrounding her. She wore the same determined expression I remembered from countless childhood battles. "Travis, sweetheart, perfect timing," Mom said, as if I'd arrived for Sunday dinner instead of an apparent home invasion. "We're just getting settled in. The boys are so excited to live by the ocean." My nephews Jake and Luke, both 12-year-old twins, with their father's dark eyes and their mother's stubborn chin, paused their wagon dragging to wave shyly. They'd grown taller since Christmas, all knees and elbows in that awkward preteen way that reminded me of my own gangly phase. "Settled in where?" I asked, though the sinking feeling in my stomach already provided the answer. "Here, of course," Mom replied, gesturing toward the cottage with proprietary confidence. "This house belongs to all of us now. Samuel would have wanted family living here instead of it sitting empty while you work yourself to death in Portland." The words hit me like cold Pacific spray. I stared at the rocking chair that had materialized on the porch, recognizing it as Mom's vintage piece from her own living room. Someone had positioned it to face the ocean, complete with the faded blue cushions she'd sewn herself. "Mom, what are you talking about?" My voice cracked like I was 15 again, arguing about curfew. "Grandpa left this house to me. You were at the will reading." Cassandra set down her box and approached with careful steps, as if I were a spooked animal. "Travis, I know this seems sudden, but we really need this place. The divorce finalized 3 months ago, and Brad's being impossible about child support. We lost our apartment in Beaverton because I couldn't make rent. That doesn't give you the right to break into my house, I said, scanning the porch for signs of forced entry. The front door showed no damage, which meant someone had a key. Break in. Mom's laugh carried a sharp edge. Don't be dramatic. We have every legal right to be here. She reached into her oversized purse and produced a manila envelope worn at the edges as if handled frequently. From inside, she withdrew a single sheet of paper covered in what appeared to be handwriting. Your grandfather signed an amendment to his will 2 weeks before he died. Mom announced, holding the document like a winning lottery ticket. He realized his mistake in leaving everything to one person. This house should benefit the entire Morrison family, not just one selfish grandson. I snatched the paper from her fingers, my hands trembling, as I scanned the contents. The handwriting looked shaky, uncertain, nothing like Grandpa Samuel's confident script that had filled countless birthday cards and Christmas notes throughout my life. The paper itself felt wrong, too thinner than the legal documents from the actual will reading. Where did this come from? I demanded. Why wasn't this presented at the probate hearing? Sometimes these things turn up later, Mom said with a dismissive wave. Samuel hid it in his fishing tackle box. I found it when I was cleaning out the garage last week. Jake and Luke had resumed unloading their wagon, arranging action figures along the porch railing with the serious concentration that only children could muster. They seemed oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults more interested in claiming territory for their toys. Uncle Travis, Luke called out, holding up a plastic dinosaur. Mom says we can catch crabs off your dock. My dock, I corrected automatically, then felt terrible for the disappointment that flashed across his face. Cassandra stepped closer, lowering her voice. Travis, please. I know this isn't ideal, but we're family. The boys have been sleeping in my car for 2 weeks. I've been parking at rest stops and truck stops trying to keep them safe while I figure things out. Do you really want your nephews living like that? The manipulation was expertly executed, just like when we were kids, and she wanted to borrow my bicycle or convince me to take the blame for her broken lamp, but the desperation in her eyes seemed genuine, and the sight of my nephews arranging their meager possessions made my chest tight. This isn't about not helping family, I said carefully. But you can't just move into someone else's house without permission. There are legal ways to do this. Legal ways take time, Mom interjected. And bureaucracy doesn't care about children sleeping in cars. Sometimes family has to take care of family with or without paperwork. I noticed she'd already changed the mailbox. Where it once read Samuel Morrison, in Grandpa's careful block letters, someone had installed a new nameplate, Morrison Family Residence. The sight made me feel sick. You've been planning this, I realized aloud. This isn't some desperate last-minute decision. You've been organizing this move for weeks. Of course we planned it, Mom replied without a trace of shame. Did you expect us to just show up with garbage bags? We're not homeless people, Travis. We're your family, and this is our family home. The moving truck rumbled to life, its diesel engine drowning out the constant whisper of waves against the shore. The driver, a burly man in coveralls, approached with a clipboard. That's everything from storage unit, ma'am, he told Mom. Where do you want me to put this paperwork? Mom accepted the delivery receipt like she was signing for groceries, completely comfortable with her role as the person in charge. The casual nature of it all made my head spin. How long had they been planning this? How many people knew about their scheme while I remained completely oblivious? As the truck pulled away, leaving deep ruts in the gravel driveway, I found myself standing in the middle of what felt like an alternate reality. 8 months ago, I'd inherited a quiet beach cottage where I could escape the stress of tax season and client demands. Now it looked like a refugee camp with boxes scattered across every surface and children's laughter echoing from inside what used to be my sanctuary. The fraudulent will amendment crumpled in my fist as the full scope of their betrayal began to sink in. This wasn't just about housing or helping family in crisis. This was about my mother and sister deciding that my inheritance belonged to them, and they were willing to forge documents to take it. The worst part was watching Jake and Luke explore their new environment with genuine excitement, unaware that their temporary refuge was built on lies and stolen property. They deserved better than this situation, but so did I. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the cottage walls with golden light that reminded me of childhood summers, I made a decision. Tomorrow I would call my attorney and figure out how to legally remove them from my property. Tonight I would drive back to Portland and pretend this nightmare wasn't happening. But as I walked back to my car passing the mailbox that no longer bore my name, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's triumphant smile as she handed me that bogus will amendment. By sunrise, I'd consumed enough coffee to fuel a semi-truck and driven back to Cannon Beach with a head full of questions and a heart full of rage. The cottage looked even more transformed in the morning light. Someone had strung Christmas lights around the porch railing, and the smell of bacon drifted through an open kitchen window. It should have felt welcoming, homey even, but instead it felt like watching strangers play house with my memories. I knocked on the front door of my own house, a bitter irony that wasn't lost on me. Cassandra answered wearing one of Grandpa's old fishing sweaters and holding a cup of coffee in a mug I recognized from his collection. "Travis, you're up early," she said, stepping aside to let me enter. "Want some breakfast? I made pancakes for the boys." The interior had been completely reorganized overnight. Cassandra's furniture mixed with Grandpa's antiques in ways that made my skin crawl. Her modern television dominated the living room, where his bookshelf used to stand, while her exercise bike occupied the corner where his reading chair had spent 40 years. Jake and Luke sat at the kitchen table, syrup sticky, and chattering about their plans to build a fort on the beach. They looked more rested than I'd seen them since their parents' divorce proceedings began, which only made this situation more complicated. "We need to talk," I told Cassandra, pulling the suspicious will amendment from my jacket pocket. "About this document Mom produced yesterday." She glanced toward the staircase where Mom's voice could be heard directing some unseen reorganization project. "Keep your voice down. She's been stressed enough already." "Stressed?" I spread the paper on the kitchen table, pointing to the shaky signature. "Cassandra, look at this handwriting. Really look at it. Does this look like Grandpa's signature to you?" She leaned over the document, her expression growing uncomfortable. "Handwriting changes when people get older, Travis, especially after strokes." "His stroke affected his left side, not his writing hand," I countered. "And look at the paper. This isn't legal letterhead. This looks like something someone printed at home." "Boys, why don't you go explore the beach?" Cassandra suggested quickly. "Just stay where we can see you from the window." Jake and Luke bounded outside with the enthusiasm of children who'd been cooped up in a car for too long. Through the kitchen window, I watched them race toward the tide pools, their laughter carried away by the morning breeze. "Even if that document is questionable," Cassandra said once we were alone, "Mom's been paying the property taxes and insurance on this place for months without telling you. Doesn't that count for something?" "She's been what?" The coffee cup slipped in my hand, nearly spilling across the table. "She didn't want you to worry about the expenses while you were dealing with the estate paperwork. She's been covering everything since February." The revelation hit me like a rogue wave. I'd been so focused on work and grieving Grandpa's death that I hadn't paid attention to the mundane details of property ownership. His lawyer had mentioned something about ongoing expenses, but I'd assumed they were automatically handled by the estate. "Where did she get the money for that?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer wouldn't be pleasant. "She took out a small loan." Cassandra admitted not meeting my eyes. "Against the house's value, just $15,000 to cover taxes and maintenance until everything got sorted out. A loan against my property." My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "Cassandra, that's fraud. You can't take out loans against property you don't own." "She has documentation showing she's a co-owner," Cassandra said defensively. "That will amendment makes her a legal beneficiary. That will amendment is fake and you know it. The accusation hung in the air between us like smoke from a beach bonfire. Cassandra's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the little sister who used to cry when her ice cream fell off its cone. "Maybe it is," she whispered. "But Travis, I'm desperate. Brad hasn't paid child support in 3 months. I lost my job at the insurance company when they downsized. I've been living off credit cards and whatever freelance work I can find. Why didn't you call me?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Because you would have given me a lecture about financial responsibility and suggested I move back in with Mom. You would have meant well, but you wouldn't have really helped. Not the way I needed." The words stung because they contained enough truth to hurt. I had always been the practical one, the planner, the brother who solved problems with spreadsheets and logic rather than emotion and impulse. "So you decided to steal my house instead?" "We decided to claim what should have been ours all along." Mom's voice cut through the conversation like a blade. She descended the stairs carrying an armload of photo albums already dressed for the day, in pressed slacks and a cardigan. "Your grandfather loved all of us, Travis, not just you." "Grandpa left everything to me because he trusted me to do the right thing with it," I shot back. "Not because he loved me more." "The right thing?" Mom laughed bitterly. "The right thing would be taking care of your family, instead of hoarding inheritance like some greedy landlord. When was the last time you even visited this place before Samuel died?" The question hit home because the answer was embarrassing. I'd been so busy with work, so focused on building my accounting practice, that I'd barely seen Grandpa in his final months. Mom and Cassandra had been the ones visiting, bringing groceries, helping with doctor appointments. "That doesn't give you the right to forge legal documents," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "I didn't forge anything," Mom replied smoothly. "That amendment is perfectly legitimate. Samuel asked me to type it up because his arthritis was bothering him. He signed it willingly." "Then why wasn't it included with the rest of his will?" "Sometimes people hide important documents," she said with a shrug. "Samuel was paranoid about lawyers and courts. He preferred to handle family matters within the family. It was a plausible explanation which made it even more infuriating. Mom had always been skilled at crafting stories that contained just enough truth to be believable. But I'd seen enough forged documents in my accounting practice to recognize the telltale signs. "I'm calling the police," I announced, pulling out my phone. "Go ahead," Mom said calmly. "But you might want to know that I've already filed paperwork with the county claiming co-ownership of this property. Deputy Morgan was very sympathetic when I explained that my grandson was trying to throw his own family onto the street. You talked to the sheriff's department yesterday evening right after you left. I wanted to make sure there wouldn't be any misunderstandings when you inevitably tried to cause trouble. Deputy Morgan said this kind of inheritance dispute happens all the time, and until it's resolved through proper legal channels, all current occupants have equal rights to remain on the property." The clever manipulation of it all left me breathless. While I'd been driving back to Portland in shock, Mom had been working the system like a chess master, positioning her pieces for maximum advantage. "She enrolled the boys in school too," Cassandra added quietly. "Cannon Beach Elementary, they start Monday." "You enrolled them in school?" I stared at my sister in disbelief. "Using what address?" "This address," Mom replied matter-of-factly. "I provided a lease agreement showing that we're legitimate tenants." "What lease agreement?" "The one I drafted up last week. Very thorough, very official looking. I even had it notarized at the bank." The scope of their planning was staggering. This wasn't some desperate last-minute grab for shelter. This was a calculated campaign to steal my inheritance, complete with forged documents, false legal claims, and manufactured evidence of legitimate residency. "You're criminals," I said flatly. "Both of you. This is fraud on multiple levels." "We're family taking care of family," Mom corrected. "Something you apparently never learned." Jake and Luke burst through the back door, sandy and excited, completely oblivious to the adult drama unfolding around them. "Uncle Travis," Jake called out, "we found a tide pool with a sea anemone. Want to see?" I looked at my nephew's eager face, then at my sister's desperate eyes, then at my mother's defiant expression. 3 generations of Morrison family dysfunction, all colliding in the space that was supposed to be my refuge from exactly this kind of chaos. "I need some air," I muttered, pushing past them toward the door. Outside, the morning fog was beginning to lift, revealing the familiar outline of Haystack Rock in the distance. Grandpa used to say that rock had been standing there for millions of years, weathering every storm the ocean could throw at it. He taught me to be like that rock, steady and unmovable when life got complicated. But right now I felt more like the sand being pulled out to sea by each retreating wave, my foundation eroding with every new revelation about my family's betrayal. The sound of vehicles approaching made me look up. 2 sheriff's department cruisers were pulling into the driveway, followed by what appeared to be a county official's sedan. My heart hammered as I realized Mom must have called them when she saw me return. Deputy Morgan emerged from the first cruiser, a tall woman with graying hair, and the patient expression of someone who'd seen every possible family drama. Behind her came a younger male deputy and a man in a suit carrying a briefcase. "Mr. Morrison." Deputy Morgan approached with professional courtesy. "I understand there's some confusion about property ownership here. Your mother asked us to help mediate before this situation escalates." "There's no confusion," I said firmly. "This is my house. I inherited it legally and these people are trespassing." "That's not quite accurate, son," said the man with the briefcase, introducing himself as Tom Bradley from the county assessor's office. "Your mother filed a co-ownership claim yesterday, supported by what appears to be a valid will amendment. Until that claim is investigated, she has legal standing to occupy the property." "The will amendment is forged," I insisted. "That's a serious accusation," Deputy Morgan said. "Do you have evidence to support that claim?" I realized with sinking horror that I didn't. Not really. Just intuition and knowledge of my grandfather's handwriting, neither of which would hold up in court. "The case is complicated," Bradley continued, "but based on the documentation your mother provided, including evidence that she's been maintaining the property and has established residency, my office can't authorize a forcible removal. This needs to be settled through proper legal channels." "How long will that take?" I asked, though I suspected I wouldn't like the answer. "Inheritance disputes can take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years to resolve," Bradley replied. "Depends on how complicated the case becomes." 2 years. 2 years of my family living in my house, rearranging my memories, making themselves at home in the space that was supposed to be mine alone. The thought made me physically ill. In the meantime, Deputy Morgan added, "I strongly suggest you work this out as a family. The courts prefer to see good faith efforts at mediation before they'll intervene in domestic property disputes." As the officials departed, leaving me standing alone in the driveway of my own house, I felt more isolated than I had since Grandpa's funeral. The people who were supposed to love and support me had instead conspired to rob me. And the legal system I'd trusted to protect property rights was powerless to help. But as I watched my mother peek triumphantly through the kitchen window, I made a silent promise. If she wanted to play legal games, I would learn the rules better than she ever imagined. If she thought she could manipulate the system to steal what was mine, she was about to discover that 2 could play that game. I just had to figure out how to beat her at it without destroying what was left of our family in the process. The law offices of Davidson, Brooks and Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian house in downtown Portland, complete with creaky floors and windows that rattled when trucks passed. David Brennan's secretary informed me that he wouldn't return from his conference in Seattle until Thursday, leaving me 4 days to navigate this nightmare alone. "Can someone else help me?" I asked, trying not to sound as desperate as I felt. "Mr. Patterson handles property disputes," she offered, "but he's booked solid until next week. I could put you on his cancellation list. Next week might be too late, I muttered, hanging up the phone. Back at Cannon Beach, the situation had somehow gotten worse during my 2-hour absence. A small crowd had gathered on the street, neighbors who'd come to gawk at the Morrison family drama. Mrs. Chen from next door was deep in conversation with my mother, nodding sympathetically as Mom gestured toward the cottage. I parked and approached cautiously, catching fragments of their conversation. Such a shame when families can't work together, Mrs. Chen was saying. That poor woman trying to care for her grandchildren after such a difficult divorce. Mom spotted me and waved cheerfully, as if she hadn't just spent the morning manipulating law enforcement. Travis, dear, I was just explaining to the neighbors about our living situation. Everyone's been so supportive. Our living situation, I repeated through gritted teeth. Well, naturally people were curious about all the activity, Mom replied innocently. I simply told them the truth about how Samuel intended for the whole family to benefit from his generosity. The way she said it made my skin crawl. She'd spent the morning spreading her version of events throughout the neighborhood, building a network of support that would make any future legal action look like I was the villain harassing a poor grandmother and her displaced daughter. Mrs. Morrison, Mrs. Chen addressed my mother, please let me know if there's anything James and I can do to help. It's wonderful to see children playing on the street again. As if summoned by her words, Jake and Luke came racing around the side of the house, chasing each other with water guns and shrieking with laughter. They looked happier than I'd seen them in months, which only made this situation more heartbreaking. Boys, say hello to Uncle Travis, Cassandra called from the porch where she was hanging wet beach towels on the railing. Hi, Uncle Travis, they chorused dutifully before resuming their water fight. I watched them play in what should have been my yard-wearing swimsuits I didn't recognize, using toys that hadn't been here yesterday. Every detail of their presence felt simultaneously natural and completely wrong. They've adapted quickly, Mom observed following my gaze. Children are resilient that way. They just need stability and family support to thrive. This isn't stability, I said quietly. This is theft dressed up as family values. Oh, Travis. Mom sighed dramatically. You always were prone to melodrama. This is simply family taking care of family the way Samuel would have wanted. I was about to respond when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my cousin Mark's number, and I stepped away from the crowd to answer. Travis, man. I heard about what's happening, Mark said without preamble. Aunt Linda called my mom last night, spinning some story about you trying to kick them out of the family beach house. It's not the family beach house, I said firmly. It's my house. Grandpa left it to me specifically. Yeah, well, she's been telling a different story to anyone who'll listen. She called Uncle Pete and Aunt Sarah too, asking for character references for some legal thing she's filing. My stomach dropped. What kind of character references? Something about how you've always been selfish with family resources, how you never visited Grandpa when he was sick, how you don't understand the value of family unity. She's building a narrative cousin, making you look like the bad guy. The scope of Mom's campaign was breathtaking. While I'd been focused on the legal aspects of property ownership, she'd been working the emotional and social angles, recruiting family members to support her version of events. There's something else, Mark continued. She asked my mom for a loan last month. $5,000, said it was for helping Cassie with the divorce. But now I'm wondering if it was for something else. Like what? Like paying for fake legal documents, or maybe covering the costs of this move? Travis, I think she's been planning this for months. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another official-looking vehicle. This time it was a representative from Ocean County Bank, a stern-faced woman in a business suit who introduced herself as Margaret Wells from the Fraud Investigation Department. Mr. Morrison, she addressed me directly. I understand you're claiming that a loan was fraudulently obtained against this property. That's correct, I said, relief flooding through me. Finally, someone who might be able to help. I'll need to speak with all parties involved, Wells said, pulling out a tablet. Including the person who signed the loan documents. Mom emerged from the house with perfect timing, having apparently prepared for this moment. She carried a folder full of paperwork and wore the confident expression of someone who believed her own lies. "Ms. Wells, how nice to meet you," Mom said warmly. "I hope we can clear up this unfortunate misunderstanding quickly. My son seems confused about the ownership structure of this property. According to our records, you obtained a $15,000 equity loan against this address 3 weeks ago," Wells said, consulting her tablet. "The application listed you as co-owner of the property." "That's correct," Mom replied smoothly. "Based on the will amendment that establishes joint family ownership, I provided a copy of that document when I applied for the loan." Wells turned to me. "Do you have documentation disputing this co-ownership claim?" I showed her the original will from Grandpa's estate, but realized with growing dread that it didn't explicitly contradict Mom's version of events. The will left everything to me, but if there was a subsequent amendment that could theoretically change the ownership structure. "This is a complex situation," Wells concluded after examining both documents. "Until the validity of the will amendment is determined through proper legal channels, I can't make a determination about loan fraud. However, I will note in the file that ownership is disputed." As Wells departed, I felt like I was drowning in bureaucracy. Every official who arrived seemed to add another layer of complexity rather than clarity. Mom had constructed her deception so carefully that it would require months of legal proceedings to unravel. "Don't look so glum, sweetheart," Mom said cheerfully. "These things always work themselves out when family puts love first." That evening, I sat on the beach behind the cottage watching the sun disappear into the Pacific while trying to figure out my next move. The sound of children's laughter drifted from the house, mixed with the domestic sounds of dinner preparation and evening routines. Cassandra joined me on the sand, wrapping a sweater around her shoulders against the evening chill. "I'm sorry it's come to this," she said quietly. "I never wanted to hurt you, Travis, but I was running out of options." "Did you know she was going to forge that will amendment?" Cassandra was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening ocean. "I suspected something wasn't right when she suddenly became confident about our legal standing. But I was so desperate, so scared about what would happen to the boys that I didn't ask too many questions. She's been planning this since Grandpa died, hasn't she?" "Probably longer than that," Cassandra admitted. "She always resented that Grandpa favored you. All those fishing trips, the way he taught you about carpentry and property maintenance. She felt like she was the one who really took care of him at the end, but you were the one who got rewarded." "I was 11 years old when those fishing trips started," I said defensively. "I didn't ask to be favored." "I know, and honestly, you deserved it. You were the one who called him every week, who remembered his birthday, who actually listened to his stories. Mom and I visited out of obligation. You visited because you loved him." The admission hung between us like driftwood on the tide, too heavy to move but impossible to ignore. "So what happens now?" I asked. "I don't know," Cassandra said honestly. "Mom thinks she can win this through persistence and manipulation. She's already talking about painting the kitchen and enrolling the boys in Little League. She's acting like this place already belongs to us." "And what do you think?" "I think she's gotten us into something we can't get out of easily. And I think you have every right to be angry with both of us." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the eternal conversation between waves and shore. Finally, Cassandra stood to go inside, pausing to look back at me. "For what it's worth," she said, "I hope you fight this. Not because I want my kids to be homeless, but because what she's doing is wrong. And somebody needs to hold her accountable before she destroys what's left of our family." As I watched her walk back toward the cottage, silhouetted against the warm light spilling from Grandpa's windows, I realized that the real tragedy wasn't just the theft of my inheritance. It was the way Mom's deception had turned all of us into people we didn't want to be, her into a criminal Cassandra, into an accomplice, and me into the family villain trying to evict children from their home But sitting there on the sand where Grandpa had taught me to dig for clams, surrounded by the sound and smell of the ocean he'd loved so much, I made a promise. I would find a way to reclaim what was mine without destroying the people I loved in the process. I just had to figure out how. 3 days later, I discovered the full extent of their occupation. What I'd initially assumed was a desperate, poorly planned takeover had actually been a meticulously orchestrated campaign of deception that stretched back months. I arrived at the cottage early Thursday morning to find painters on scaffolding, transforming the weathered cedar shingles from their natural gray to a cheerful yellow that made me physically sick. Jake's bedroom window now sported bright blue trim, and someone had installed a basketball hoop above the garage door. "Surprise!" Mom called from the front porch, gesturing proudly at the work in progress. "I thought the place needed freshening up. Samuel never was one for maintenance, bless his heart." "You're painting my house without permission?" I said, my voice barely controlled. "Our house," she corrected pleasantly. "And technically, I'm improving the property value. You should be thanking me." I stormed inside to find even more shocking changes. The living room had been completely rearranged with Grandpa's antique furniture relegated to the basement, while Cassandra's modern pieces took center stage. His collection of maritime books had been boxed up and replaced with children's picture books and gaming magazines. "Where are Grandpa's things?" I demanded, finding Cassandra in the kitchen, making coffee with a machine I'd never seen before. "Safely stored in the basement," she replied without meeting my eyes. The boys needed space for their stuff, and honestly, some of those old pieces weren't very practical for family living. "Family living," I repeated incredulously. "This isn't family living. This is a hostile takeover." "Don't be so dramatic," Mom interjected, descending the stairs with an armload of Samuel's clothing. "I'm just donating these old things to charity. No point letting them take up space when someone else could use them." I intercepted the pile of clothes, recognizing Grandpa's favorite fishing sweater and the flannel shirt he'd worn every morning for 20 years. The sight of them destined for a donation bin made something snap inside my chest. "Put those back," I said quietly. "Travis, be reasonable," Mom replied. "He's gone, sweetheart. Keeping his old clothes isn't going to bring him back. Put them back now or I'm calling the police." Something in my tone must have warned her, because she actually complied, though, not without an exaggerated sigh about my emotional attachments to material things. While I was carefully returning Grandpa's clothes to his dresser, I discovered evidence that their invasion had started much earlier than I'd realized. Hidden behind some of Cassandra's belongings, I found mail addressed to Linda Morrison at this address dating back 3 months. Phone bills, magazine subscriptions, even a voter registration card listing the cottage as her primary residence. "You've been using this address since February," I accused, confronting her with the evidence. "A few pieces of mail got redirected here," she said dismissively. "Hardly a crime." "It's mail fraud if you're using an address where you don't legally reside." "Legally, I do reside here now. That will amendment establishes my rights to this property. That document is fake and we both know it." For the first time since this nightmare began, Mom's facade cracked slightly. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice took on a harder edge. "Prove it," she said coldly. "Take me to court, hire expensive lawyers, drag this out for years while your sister and nephew suffer. Is that really the kind of man Samuel raised you to be?" The manipulation was expertly crafted, designed to make me feel guilty for defending my own property rights. But I'd finally reached the point where guilt couldn't override my anger. What Samuel raised me to be, I said carefully, was honest. Something you apparently never learned. "How dare you?" Mom hissed. "I spent 40 years taking care of this family while you focused on your precious career. I was the one who held everything together when your father left. I was the one who drove Samuel to doctor appointments and managed his medications. I earned every right to benefit from his estate. By forging his signature, by being there when he needed me," she shot back. "Which is more than I can say for his favorite grandson, who was too busy with tax returns to visit. The accusation hit its mark because it contained enough truth to sting. I had been absent during Grandpa's decline, focusing on building my practice, while Mom and Cassandra handled the day-to-day care responsibilities. But guilt didn't change the fundamental facts. They had stolen my inheritance through fraud and deception, and now they were systematically erasing every trace of the man who'd actually owned this place. "I need some air," I muttered, heading for the beach. The tide was coming in erasing footprints and smoothing away yesterday's evidence of human activity. I wished my problems could be solved as easily as sand patterns washed clean with each cycle of the waves. My phone buzzed with a text from David Brennan. "Back from conference early. Can meet tomorrow at 9 a.m. if urgent. What's the situation?" I was typing a response when I heard voices approaching from the cottage. Jake and Luke were walking toward me, their expressions uncharacteristically serious for 12-year-olds. "Uncle Travis," Jake said hesitantly, "are you mad at us?" The question caught me off guard. "Why would you think that—" "Mom and Grandma keep arguing about you," Luke explained. "They say you don't want us to live here anymore." I crouched down to their eye level, trying to find words that were honest without being cruel. These boys were innocent victims of their grandmother's schemes, and they deserved better than being caught in the middle of adult conflicts. "I'm not mad at you," I said carefully. "But this situation is complicated. This house was supposed to be mine, and I need to figure out how to handle that." "But we like it here," Jake said quietly. "It's the first place that's felt like home since Dad moved out." The simple honesty of it broke my heart. These kids had been through enough upheaval without becoming homeless because of their grandmother's criminal behavior. "I know you do," I replied. "And I don't want you to be hurt by any of this. But your grandmother did some things that weren't okay, and I have to make sure the right thing happens." "What kind of things?" Luke asked with the curious directness that only children possessed. Before I could figure out how to answer that question, Mom's voice cut across the beach. "Boys, come inside for lunch," she called. "Don't bother your uncle with all your questions." They ran back toward the house, leaving me alone with my phone and the weight of decisions that would affect multiple lives. I finished texting David Brennan, trying to summarize months of family dysfunction in a few sentences. The response came back quickly. "This is complex. Bring all documentation tomorrow. We'll need to move fast if you want to prevent them from establishing adverse possession rights." Adverse possession. I'd heard the term in law school business courses, but never imagined it would apply to my own family. The idea that Mom could actually steal my house through legal technicalities if I waited too long was terrifying. That evening, I drove back to Portland with a new sense of urgency. This wasn't just about family drama anymore. This was about preventing a crime that was already in progress, orchestrated by people who claimed to love me while systematically destroying my inheritance. But as I navigated the winding coastal highway in darkness, I couldn't stop thinking about Jake's words. "It's the first place that's felt like home since Dad moved out." How do you reclaim what's yours without destroying what others desperately need? How do you hold family accountable without becoming the villain in your own story? I still didn't have answers to those questions, but I finally understood one thing clearly. Sometimes protecting what you love requires fighting the people you love most. Tomorrow I would start fighting back. The Red Lion Hotel in downtown Portland wasn't exactly luxury accommodations, but it offered something my apartment couldn't distance from the emotional chaos consuming my life. I spread documents across the questionable bedspread like a general planning a military campaign. My laptop open to legal research websites and property law databases. David Brennan had been thorough during our morning meeting, but his advice was both helpful and terrifying. Mom's scheme was more sophisticated than simple document forgery. She'd created what lawyers called apparent authority through her pattern of paying bills, receiving mail, and establishing residency. Even with a fake will amendment, she might have legitimate squatter's rights if I waited too long to act. "The clock is ticking," David had warned. "Every day she occupies that property strengthens her position. In Oregon, continuous possession for 30 days can establish certain tenant rights even without a formal lease. 30 days. It had already been a week since their invasion began, which left me 3 weeks to prove fraud, evict my family, and reclaim my inheritance before they gained legal standing as residents. My first call was to cousin Mark, who answered on the second ring despite the late hour. "Travis, how's the war going?" he asked with dark humor. "I need information," I said bluntly. "How many family members has Mom contacted about this situation?" "Let me think. She called my mom Uncle Pete, Aunt Sarah, and I think she reached out to your dad's side too. She's been working the phones like a politician before an election." "What exactly is she telling them?" "The usual manipulation tactics. You're being selfish. She's protecting the grandchildren. Samuel would be rolling over in his grave, that kind of guilt trip. She's also hinting that there might be legal fees involved if this goes to court, and wondering if people might help with costs." Legal fees. Of course, Mom would try to crowdfund her defense while painting me as the aggressor. The woman had turned family manipulation into an art form. "Mark, I need you to do something for me," I said. "Call everyone she's contacted and get their exact conversations. Record everything if possible. I need to document her pattern of deception." "You think that'll help in court?" "My lawyer says establishing a pattern of fraudulent behavior could be crucial if this goes to trial." After hanging up with Mark, I turned to my laptop and began researching Linda Morrison's financial history. What I found made my blood run cold. Public records showed that Mom had been refinancing her own house repeatedly over the past 2 years, extracting equity through a series of loans that now totaled more than the property was worth. She was underwater on her mortgage, behind on credit card payments, and facing potential foreclosure within 6 months. The beach house wasn't just about family sentiment or helping Cassandra. Mom was broke desperate and had identified my inheritance as her salvation. The equity loan she'd obtained against my property would buy her time to reorganize her finances, while selling the cottage outright would solve her money problems permanently. My phone rang, interrupting my research. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar local number. "Mr. Morrison." "This is Principal Janet Williams from Cannon Beach Elementary School. I'm calling about the enrollment paperwork for Jake and Luke Morrison." "What about it?" I asked, though I already suspected where this was heading. "There are some discrepancies in the documentation. The lease agreement provided by your mother doesn't match our standard formatting requirements, and frankly, it looks like it might have been created on a home computer rather than by a property management company." Finally, a crack in Mom's armor. "What kind of discrepancies?" "Missing property owner information, incorrect legal descriptions, and the notary seal doesn't match our database of authorized notaries in this county. I'm required to report suspected fraudulent enrollment documents to the district office." "Please do that," I said eagerly. "And if you need verification of actual property ownership, I can provide legal documentation showing that I'm the sole owner of that address." "That would be very helpful, Mr. Morrison. We take enrollment fraud seriously, especially when children's welfare is involved." After hanging up, I felt my first genuine surge of optimism since this nightmare began. Mom's web of deception was so extensive that she'd inevitably made mistakes, leaving a trail of evidence that could be used against her. My next call was to Ocean County Bank's fraud department. Margaret Wells wasn't available, but her assistant connected me to the loan investigation team. "I'm calling about the fraudulent equity loan obtained against my property 3 weeks ago," I explained to the investigator. "Yes, sir, we have that file flagged for review. Have you obtained legal documentation disputing the co-ownership claim? I'm working with an attorney to challenge the will amendment used to support the loan application. But I've discovered additional evidence that might be relevant to your investigation." "What kind of evidence?" "Financial records showing that my mother has been facing foreclosure on her own property and has significant debt obligations. The loan against my house appears to be part of a pattern of fraudulent borrowing to avoid bankruptcy." "That's very helpful information, Mr. Morrison. We'll add that to the investigation file. If you can provide documentation of her financial situation, it would strengthen the fraud case significantly. The pieces were falling into place, but I knew Mom wouldn't go down without a fight. She'd spent months planning this takeover, and she wouldn't surrender easily when confronted with evidence of her crimes. My phone buzzed with a text from Cassandra. Mom's talking about hiring a lawyer. She says you're trying to frame her for crimes she didn't commit. This is getting scary, Travis. I stared at the message, trying to decode what it really meant. Was Cassandra finally recognizing the seriousness of their situation? Or was this another manipulation tactic designed to make me feel guilty for pursuing legal action? Either way, Mom's decision to lawyer up confirmed that she understood the precarious nature of her position. She wouldn't be hiring legal representation if she was confident in the legitimacy of her documents. I spent the rest of the evening crafting a comprehensive timeline of Mom's deception, complete with dates, documentation, and witness accounts. The pattern that emerged was damning months of systematic fraud designed to steal property through a combination of forged documents, false legal claims, and emotional manipulation. But as I worked late into the night, I couldn't shake Cassandra's words from our beach conversation. I hope you fight this, but I also hope you find a way to do it without destroying what's left of our family. The challenge wasn't just winning the legal battle anymore. It was figuring out how to hold Mom accountable while still protecting Cassandra and the boys from the consequences of her actions. They were victims too, caught between my mother's criminal ambition and my need for justice. By midnight, I developed a strategy that balanced legal necessity with family preservation. Tomorrow, I would implement the first phase documenting every aspect of their illegal occupation while creating a paper trail that would be impossible to dispute in court. Mom thought she was smart, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the grandson who'd spent years learning about financial fraud and documentation requirements through his accounting practice. I knew exactly how to build a case that would not only reclaim my property, but expose her crimes in a way that even she couldn't manipulate or explain away. The war for my inheritance was about to begin in earnest, and this time I held the superior firepower. Friday morning dawned gray and misty, the kind of coastal weather that made the cottage look like something from a Gothic novel. I arrived early, parking down the street where I could observe without being noticed. What I saw through my binoculars made my stomach turn. Mom had arranged a meeting with a real estate agent. A woman in a business suit was walking around the property with a measuring tape, while Mom followed, gesturing enthusiastically at various features. They spent considerable time examining the ocean view from the back deck and taking notes about the recently painted exterior. My inheritance was being appraised for sale while I sat helplessly in my car. I called David Brennan immediately. "She's moving faster than we anticipated," he said grimly after I described the scene. "If she's serious about selling, she'll need to produce clear title documentation. That's where we can trap her." "What do you mean?" "A legitimate real estate transaction requires title insurance, which means a thorough examination of all ownership documents. When the title company discovers that her will amendment doesn't match the original probate records, the sale will be blocked automatically. And then she's committed real estate fraud in addition to document forgery. That's a felony with serious prison time." The word prison hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything Mom had done, the idea of her behind bars made me feel sick. She was still my mother, still the woman who'd raised me and sacrificed for our family, even if she'd lost her way. "There might be another option," David continued. "If we can prove fraud before any sale proceeds, she might be willing to negotiate a settlement that avoids criminal charges." "What kind of settlement?" "Full restitution, assigned confession, and permanent removal from the property in exchange for not pressing charges. It would give you back your house while giving her a chance to avoid prison." It wasn't the total victory I'd imagined, but it might be the best outcome for everyone involved. Criminal prosecution would destroy what was left of our family relationships, while a negotiated settlement could preserve some possibility of eventual reconciliation. But first, I needed more evidence. I spent the morning conducting surveillance and making phone calls to build my case. The real estate agent, Jennifer Walsh from Coastal Properties, was surprisingly helpful when I called her directly. "Mr. Morrison, I'm glad you reached out," she said. "Your mother's listing request raised some red flags for me. She couldn't produce clear title documentation, and some of her answers about property history seemed evasive." "What kind of questions?" "Basic things like when she acquired ownership, whether there were any liens or encumbrances, family members who might have competing claims." She became defensive and suggested I could get all the details from her attorney. "Did she mention having an attorney?" "She said she was working with someone in Portland but couldn't remember the firm name when I asked for contact information. That's highly unusual for someone preparing to sell property worth over $500,000. $500,000. The cottage had appreciated significantly since Grandpa's death, which explained Mom's desperation to claim it as her own. That kind of money would solve all her financial problems while setting up Cassandra and the boys for years. "Ms. Walsh, I need to inform you that my mother doesn't actually own that property," I said. "She's attempting to sell stolen real estate using forged documents." "I suspected something like that," Walsh replied. "I'm withdrawing from the listing immediately and documenting this conversation for legal purposes. You might want to know that she mentioned having other agents lined up if I didn't work out. After hanging up, I realized Mom's timetable was accelerating. She wasn't just planning to live in my house indefinitely, she was racing to sell it before I could stop her. Every day of delay increased the risk that she might find a less scrupulous agent willing to overlook documentation problems." My phone rang with a call from Mark. "Travis, I've got bad news," he said without preamble. "Aunt Linda's been telling family members that you're having some kind of mental breakdown. She's claiming you've become obsessed with money since Grandpa died and that you're threatening to have her arrested for trying to help family." "Mental breakdown," I repeated incredulously. "She's painting you as unstable, paranoid, maybe even dangerous. She told my mom you've been making threatening phone calls and following her around town. She's building a case that you're not mentally competent to handle property ownership." The sophisticated manipulation took my breath away. Mom wasn't just defending herself against fraud charges, she was proactively attacking my credibility and mental state to justify her actions. If she could convince people that I was having a breakdown, her theft might look like protective intervention. "There's more," Mark continued. "She's been in contact with Adult Protective Services, claiming that you're isolated, paranoid, and making irrational financial decisions. She told them she's concerned about your mental health and thinks someone needs to evaluate your capacity to manage your inheritance." Adult Protective Services. Mom had somehow twisted the situation so completely that I was now the victim needing protection from my own property rights. The audacity of it was breathtaking. What did APS say? They're required to investigate any report of potential incompetence or exploitation. Someone will probably contact you within a few days to assess your mental state and living situation. I hung up feeling like I was drowning in quicksand. Every move I made to reclaim my property was being reframed as evidence of mental instability, while Mom positioned herself as the concerned family member trying to protect everyone from my alleged breakdown. But as I sat in my car watching the cottage that should have been my refuge, I realized she'd made a crucial mistake. Her story required me to be mentally incompetent, which meant there should be evidence of erratic behavior, poor judgment, or inability to function normally. The problem was that no such evidence existed. I was successfully running an accounting practice, maintaining professional relationships, and handling complex financial matters for multiple clients. Any objective evaluation would reveal that I was completely rational and competent. Mom's manipulation strategy was so extreme that it would collapse under scrutiny, especially if I could demonstrate that she was the one behaving irrationally and criminally. I called David Brennan back with a new plan. "I want to set a trap," I told him. "Let her continue with the sale process until she's committed to serious fraud charges, then present her with the choice between prison and full restitution. That's risky, David warned. If something goes wrong, you could lose the property entirely. I don't think so. She's gotten so confident in her manipulation that she's overplaying her hand. The mental incompetence angle is desperate, and the real estate fraud will be impossible to explain away. What do you need from me? Documentation of my mental competence, evidence of her financial desperation, and a timeline showing premeditated fraud rather than family dispute. When this is over, I want her to understand that she never had a chance of succeeding. As I drove away from Cannon Beach that afternoon, I felt calmer than I had in weeks. Mom thought she was playing chess while I stumbled around like an amateur. But she'd forgotten that I was the family member who'd spent years analyzing financial crimes and understanding how documentation fraud worked. She was about to discover that her favorite grandson had learned more than just accounting principles during his professional training. He'd learned how to build airtight cases against people who thought they were too smart to get caught. The only question now was whether she'd accept defeat gracefully or force me to destroy her completely to reclaim what was mine. Sunday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of Pacific Northwest weather that made everything look like a postcard. I stood on the bluff overlooking Cannon Beach watching my family load boxes into a rented moving truck while 3 sheriff's deputies supervised the proceedings. It had taken exactly 72 hours to bring down Mom's elaborate scheme. The trap had worked perfectly. When Mom contacted a second real estate agent on Friday afternoon, I was ready with documentation proving my sole ownership evidence of her fraudulent loan application and testimony from witnesses who'd heard her admit to forging Grandpa's will amendment. Bank investigator Margaret Wells had been particularly thorough, comparing the suspicious loan documents with Mom's known handwriting samples and financial records. The forensic analysis revealed that the will amendment had been created on her home printer using fonts that didn't exist when Grandpa was alive. But the final blow came from an unexpected source, Grandpa's hidden security camera system. During his final months, Samuel Morrison had installed motion-activated cameras around the cottage to monitor for break-ins and vandalism. The system stored footage on a hidden hard drive that I discovered while searching the basement for his tools. The recordings were devastating. They showed Mom and Cassandra conducting reconnaissance visits weeks before Grandpa's death, with Mom clearly stating, "Don't worry about the will. I'll figure out how to get what we deserve from this place after he's gone." Premeditated fraud captured in high-definition video with clear audio. Deputy Morgan had arrested Mom on Saturday morning while she was meeting with a third real estate agent, this one willing to overlook documentation irregularities for a higher commission rate. The charges included forgery, fraud, identity theft, and attempted grand larceny. Cassandra hadn't been charged thanks to her cooperation with investigators and her obvious status as a reluctant accomplice rather than the mastermind, but she'd agreed to vacate the property immediately and testify against Mom if the case went to trial. Now I watched from the bluff as my sister supervised the loading of her possessions, her movements efficient but subdued. Jake and Luke helped carry boxes, their earlier enthusiasm, replaced by confused sadness at leaving their temporary paradise. They deserved better than this situation, and I'd spent Saturday night figuring out how to help them without rewarding their grandmother's crimes. I walked down to the cottage as the last boxes were being loaded. Cassandra looked up from supervising the movers, her eyes red from crying, but her expression determined. "I'm sorry, Travis," she said simply, "for all of it." "I know you are," I replied, "and I have a proposition for you." I handed her a legal document that David Brennan had prepared overnight. It's a legitimate lease agreement for the family cabin up in the Coast Range. 6 months rent-free, utilities included, while you get back on your feet. After that, market rate if you want to stay. "Travis, I can't accept charity," she protested, though hope flickered in her eyes. "It's not charity. It's family helping family the right way with honesty and mutual respect. The cabin's been empty since Uncle Robert moved to Arizona. You'd actually be doing me a favor by keeping it maintained." Jake and Luke approached hesitantly, clearly uncertain about their role in the adult drama surrounding them. "Uncle Travis," Jake asked quietly, "are we in trouble?" I crouched down to their level, choosing my words carefully. "You're not in trouble at all. Your grandmother made some bad choices, but that's not your fault. And you're going to have a new adventure living in the mountains for a while." "Will there be fishing?" Luke asked, brightening slightly. "The best trout fishing in Oregon, I promised. And hiking trails and a rope swing over the swimming hole. Your mom can drive you down here to visit the beach whenever you want." The boys exchanged excited glances, their resilience already adapting to this new possibility. Children were remarkably good at moving forward when adults provided stability and honesty. Cassandra accepted the lease agreement with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll pay you back somehow. Just take care of your boys, and don't let Mom drag you into any more schemes," I said. "She's facing serious charges, Cassandra. Prison time. You need to focus on building a life that doesn't depend on her decisions." As the moving truck pulled away, I stood alone in front of the cottage that was finally legally and completely mine again. The yellow paint would have to go, and I'd need to restore Grandpa's furniture to its proper places, but those were small problems compared to what I'd almost lost. My phone rang with a call from David Brennan. "The prosecutor wants to discuss a plea bargain," he reported. "Your mother's attorney is suggesting she might be willing to make full restitution and accept probation in exchange for reduced charges. What do you think?" "Honestly, she's looking at 2 to 5 years in prison if this goes to trial. The evidence is overwhelming and judges don't like family members who prey on inheritance disputes. A plea deal might be the best outcome for everyone." I walked through the cottage taking inventory of what needed to be restored. In Grandpa's study, I found his collection of maritime books exactly where I'd left them, apparently too heavy for Mom to bother moving. His fishing gear remained untouched in the closet, and his favorite coffee mug still sat on the kitchen windowsill. Some things had survived the invasion unchanged. 3 months later, I sat on the restored porch, watching the sunset paint Haystack Rock in shades of gold and crimson. The cottage looked exactly as it had during Grandpa's final summer, complete with the original gray cedar shingles and the reading chair positioned to catch the afternoon light. Mom had accepted the plea bargain: 5 years probation, full restitution of the fraudulent loan, 1,000 hours of community service, and mandatory counseling for financial crimes. She'd also signed a document acknowledging my sole ownership of the property and agreeing never to contest Grandpa's will again. The counseling had apparently been helpful. According to Mark, she'd begun to understand how her financial desperation had led her to justify increasingly serious crimes. She'd written me a letter acknowledging her actions and expressing hope that we might eventually rebuild our relationship on honest foundations. I wasn't ready for reconciliation yet, but I wasn't ruling it out forever either. Cassandra and the boys were thriving at the mountain cabin. She'd found work as a freelance bookkeeper, handling accounts for several small businesses in the nearby town. The boys had joined the local youth soccer league and were already planning camping trips for summer vacation. More importantly, they were learning that stability came from honest work and mutual support, not from schemes and manipulation. The cottage had become what Grandpa always intended: a place where family could find peace and restoration. But only when they approached it with integrity and respect for each other's boundaries. As the stars emerged over the Pacific, I reflected on the lessons this ordeal had taught me. Protecting what you love sometimes requires fighting for it, even against people you care about. Real family support means holding each other accountable while still offering genuine help when needed. And sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who think they love you best, but have lost sight of the difference between love and control. I'd learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for healthy relationships. That forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, and that trust must be rebuilt through actions, not just words. Most importantly, I discovered that my grandfather's greatest gift wasn't the cottage itself, but the values he'd taught me about honesty, responsibility, and treating others with dignity. Those lessons had guided me through the worst crisis of my adult life and helped me find a solution that protected everyone's interests while still demanding accountability. The ocean whispered its eternal conversation with the shore, and for the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. Have you ever had to fight for something that rightfully belonged to you while trying to preserve relationships with the people taking it away? How do you balance protecting your own interests with caring for family members who make destructive choices? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and remember to like this video if it resonated with your own experiences. Subscribe for more stories about family justice and finding your way through life's most difficult challenges. And please share this story with anyone who might benefit from learning about the importance of boundaries and honest communication in family relationships. Thank you for listening to this journey of reclaiming not just my inheritance, but my own sense of what family should really mean. I hope your own family relationships are built on the foundation of mutual respect and genuine love that makes everyone stronger. Take care and remember that sometimes protecting what matters most requires the courage to stand up for what's right even when it's hard.